Good afternoon. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I'm Cliff Kelley, and we're streaming live at www.wvon.com, and it is Tuesday, October 25th, and of course our call-in number is 591-1690, and we are so pleased to have in our studio none other than a wonderful gentleman that I just love. He's just such a credit to our society, and he is the head, of course, of the Nation of Islam, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. How are you, Brother Minister?
Well, first I want to thank you and radio station WVON for the privilege of being once again before these microphones. I am feeling as well as can be expected. I feel like I have lost a very, very important member of my own family. So I can't take the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi lightly, as I could not take the assassination of my brother or my mother or my wife or my children lightly. That's the kind of relationship that we had and that we have. So I come to say to the world that the Nation of Islam mourns the loss of a great brother leader, the lion of the desert, the lion of Africa, and those who rejoice at his death. Your laughter will turn to tears, and your joy will turn to sorrow and great pain because of what the Western world and those collaborators will lose as a result of his betrayal and his ultimate assassination.
One of the things, Brother Minister, that so many people, and obviously we've all been talking about that here on WVON ever since this unfortunate incident took place. But a lot of people don't know not only of the history of Colonel Gaddafi and the many good things that he has done, and particularly for the nation, the African Union and things such as that, nor do they know the connection that you have had with the Colonel. So would you please tell us about both of those?
Well, very, very briefly, first, he comes to mind as a young colonel who, in a bloodless coup, took the reins of power from King Idris, who was like a friend of the West and allowed the West unfettered access to the richness of Libya's oil resources. So when brother came to power in a bloodless coup and pushed the British and the American bases out of Libya and nationalized its oil, immediately he became a threat to the West. And it was at that time that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was desirous of purchasing a Greek Orthodox church on Stony Island Avenue to make it the national headquarters of the Nation of Islam. And he sent his emissaries to Libya and asked for a $3 million loan from Muammar Gaddafi, and a relationship began. I watched his career, but my relationship with him began in the late 70s and 80s as we were beginning to rebuild the Nation of Islam. And in 1985, on September the 17th, while I was in a little village in Mexico called Tepoztlan. On the night of the 17th, I had an experience that is an extraordinary experience, because in the night I climbed a mountain that you can't climb except in the day, except you have very good lights. But I climbed that mountain in a vision-like experience, and at the top of that mountain, one of these so-called UFOs came close to the top of that mountain, and the top of the mountain was lit very brightly. I was summoned to that little wheel, and I called those with me to come, and the voice from the wheel said, "Not them, just you." And as I got closer, 3 prongs came out of this circular type plane, but it never came over the mountain. And it told me to relax, and a beam of light came down from that UFO and lifted me into it. And I sat next to the pilot, but I couldn't see him. And he sped away at a terrific speed and took me to the mother of all of these wheels, which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us was a mechanical object which was a half a mile by a half a mile. I was frightened, because to see such a huge mechanical object in the sky, although I was taught of it, now I'm about to experience it. The pilot knew that I was afraid, so he maneuvered his wheel-like plane craftily into that mother of planes, and he opened the door for me to get out and opened another door into which I went. I have described this over and over again to those who believe and, of course, those who disbelieve. But a scroll rolled down with cursive writing on it. And as I began to get closer to it to read it, I heard the voice of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as hopefully you are hearing my voice right now. He told me that the president had met with his Joint Chiefs of Staff to plan a war. And he wanted me to make known the president's plans. And he said, "Tell them that you got it from me, Elijah Muhammad, on the wheel." He said, "You have one more thing to do, and then you can come again to the wheel, and I will allow you to see me face to face." That experience, and by the way, after that experience, I completely forgot it. I woke up the next morning not remembering anything, the morning of the 18th. But on the morning of the 19th, there was a great earthquake in Mexico City that was, I think, 8.1 on the Richter scale. And where I was in Tepoztlan, it shook the hotel, and I went to Mother Tynetta's home, who lives there. And then I remembered my experience and said it for the first time. To make it very brief, shortly thereafter I was on a world tour President Reagan, while I was in the country of Belize, came on television announcing that no American was to have any dealings with Libya and Muammar Gaddafi under penalty of 10 years in prison and a heavy fine. I wondered then, was Muammar Gaddafi the man or the war that I was told about? While I was in Ghana, it crystallized for me that it was Muammar Gaddafi and Libya. This was in 1986. And so I dismissed my family and sent them back to America. And I got on an Aeroflot Russian jet and went to Tripoli to warn Muammar Gaddafi of America's plans. I received a welcome. I was met by most of the members of the government in my hotel, and I told them my experience, and I told them that America was going to bomb their airport, their communications, their water project, etc. Before I could leave Libya, an American jet was shot down and the war, it looked like, was going to start. But I was blessed to get out, and while I was in Saudi Arabia, America bombed Benghazi, Tripoli, his home, the communication center, where, of course, it was bombed again under our present administration. His life was spared, and I knew then that God had made a brother for me and made me a brother to him. And that's how our relationship began.
This is WVON 1690, the Talk of Chicago, in studio. And we have the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We'll be back.
More intelligent conversation with the governor.
And we're back. I'm Cliff Kelley. It's 4:25 on the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. In studio, we are pleased to have, more than pleased to have, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has been giving us some very interesting information about an experience he had back in 1985 as it relates, of course, to Colonel Gaddafi. And the minister will continue.
When I was in Libya, 86 nations were meeting there, and I spoke before those 86 nations and told them my experience and warned Secretary of State Schultz and Attorney General Edwin Meese and Ronald Reagan, President, not to attack Libya. Unfortunately, they paid us no attention, naturally. So the most expensive assassination attempt in the history of the world, second only to this latest assassination attempt, which, according to all the news, brought a successful conclusion from NATO, the UN, and America's point of view. But your joy, I hate to say, your joy will be short-lived. For what you have done, America, England, France, Italy, Canada, and who else was involved? 4 great nations, plus some of the Arab League, Qatar, and others. You have set in motion something that will ultimately bring about the destruction, first, of the UN. Here now, the UN scrambling to tell the world you want to really know what happened to Muammar Gaddafi, a sitting head of state, that this weak United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and American tutelage, and the vote of the Security Council, that there would be a no-fly zone to stop Gaddafi's planes from flying. Well, you were going to protect a humanitarian relief, but you succeeded in being the author of the assassination of a sitting president or ruler of his country. Well, what are the consequences of such an act? None of us can trust the United Nations again because it is a pawn of the Western world. No nation that had weapons of mass destruction would dare give them up as Muammar Gaddafi gave up his. You can forget it with North Korea. You can forget it with Pakistan. You can forget it with any nation that has them. And now, any nation that does not have weapons of mass destruction will be clamoring to get them, because that means that is the only protection they have from these wicked witches of the West. So you've earned now a great war that is on the horizon. And killing Muammar Gaddafi, you have upset revolutionaries throughout the world, and American interests are in danger now, because the spirit that is in the world that loved him will be to do harm to American interests. Well, is that your spirit, Minister Farrakhan? I don't need weapons. The weapon that I have is the tongue that God gave me, and the word that he gave me to speak, and the warning that he gave me to give America and the world. No, I don't have that in my heart, but the scripture is very clear. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and you are about to reap all that you have sown, and then some.
Minister Louis Farrakhan, I'm Cliff Kelley. This is The Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
News, traffic, and weather. Up next on The Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
Good afternoon. This is The Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I'm Cliff Kelley, streaming live at www.wvon.com. It's 4:37, and it's Tuesday, the 25th of October, and we are so pleased to have in our studio again, always pleased to have the leader of the Nation of Islam, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, as in our studio, and we're also pleased to have a number of members of the press here with us. We appreciate all of you folks coming out. And we do have some questions from the press that have been given, and we will ask them about that a little later. And also, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a panel discussion on these issues from 6 to 7 in the WVON Legacy Room, which all of you are invited to attend. So it's free, and you can come in and enjoy. We got some great people that will be discussing this. But right now, we're going to go back to Brother Minister, who is going to tell us about some of the things that so many of us, some of the reasons, I should say, that so many of us had such great respect for Colonel Gaddafi.
First, Brother Cliff, The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said when John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated that there is no king, no ruler, no prophet who enjoys 100% the love of his people. That has never happened in these 6,000 years, and it certainly is not so in America, and it was not so in Libya. I never lived in Libya, so I don't know Libya like the Libyans know Libya. But I know something of the good of Muammar Gaddafi that made me to love him as a brother and to feel a great sense of loss at his assassination. Before I say to the public some of the things that Brother Gaddafi did that can be proved at no limit of time, I'd like to read to the public Brother Gaddafi's last will and testament that came out sometime yesterday. As you know, Brother Muammar Gaddafi was offered asylum in other countries. He refused to leave Libya, and as you know, he said he would be martyred in Libya. This is where he lived, this is where he would fight, and this is where he would die. So I'd like to read this will, and I want you to listen carefully to his words. He said, "This is my will. I, Muammar bin Mudabi bin Muhammad bin Abdussalam bin Humaid bin Abu Manya bin Humaid bin Nail al-Fusi Gaddafi, do swear that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger, peace be upon him. I pledge that I will die as a Muslim." This was written on the 17th of October. He said, "Should I be killed, I would like to be buried according to Muslim rituals in the clothes I was wearing at the time of my death, but with my body unwashed in the cemetery of Sirte next to my family and relatives. I would like that my family, especially the women and children, to be treated well after my death. The Libyan people should protect its identity, achievements, history, and the honorable image of its ancestors and heroes. The Libyan people should not relinquish the sacrifices of the free and best people. I call on my supporters to continue the resistance and fight any foreign aggressor against Libya today, tomorrow, and always. Let the free people of the world know that I could have sold out our cause in return for a secure and stable personal life. I received many offers to this effect, but chose to be at the vanguard of the confrontation as a badge of duty and honor. Even if we do not win immediately, we will provide a lesson to future generations that choosing to protect the nation is an honor, and selling it out is the greatest betrayal that history will forever remember, however they try to portray this. This was the end of his will. He was killed in a military uniform. He wanted to be buried in the khaki clothes that he was wearing. And of course, you heard the news that they took his body out in the middle of the night. He and his son, Mutasim, who we have in a picture meeting with Hillary Clinton a year and a half ago and shaking hands with Secretary of State Clinton, which should show the world that shaking hands with your enemy and receiving a pat on the back from your enemy should never lull you to sleep that the enemy has changed. The enemy is the enemy. And when you fall asleep on that knowledge, that is when the enemy will take us out. The betrayals of his inner circle. Don't think that that is overseas. That is in our own house. And we today need to watch for those close around for signs of betrayal. Because it is written in the scriptures of the Bible that in the last days perilous times will come. And betrayal will be one of the marks of the end of the world, because people will feel that they'll be safer betraying a good cause, a just cause, to save their lives. Gaddafi died in honor, fighting for the Libya that he believed in. They would never have won if NATO was not bombing day in and day out. Brother Ali Baghdadi, that is a writer and a great Arab writer, said they bombed Libya back to the Stone Age. We were in Libya. We saw Libya being built from the ground up. We witnessed what this man did for the Libyan people. And for NATO to have bombed it like this, watch for Halliburton, watch for Bechtel, watch for the vultures of London, England, and France, and others trying to rebuild the infrastructure that they purposely destroyed, which is against international law. You went for humanitarian purposes, yet 50,000 Libyans lie dead because the West wanted access to the wealth of Libya. Now let me tell you what this man did. Did he kill people? Well, hell, did our president kill people? Talk back to me. Yes. You have made your president an assassin. That the only value that he has now is that he was responsible for the death of Osama bin Laden. He was captured without a weapon. He should have been brought to America, put on trial for the American people to see this man. But he was executed, so you will never know the real truth. Then Alaki, an American citizen who is against America's policies, a drone took him out and then came back later and killed his son. Now Muammar Gaddafi and his sons lie dead. Saddam Hussein and his sons lie dead. Well, what about your sons? They're dying in Iraq on the basis of a lie. They're dying in Afghanistan on the basis of a lie. And now drones are in Pakistan, drones in Somalia, drones in Yemen. When will it stop? America, do you think that you can get away with this? If it's time for another commercial, then you go on and take the commercial. I'm just warming up.
All right. Thank you, Brother Minister. Brother Minister, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is in our studio. I'm Cliff Kelley. Stay with us.
More intelligent conversation.
It is 4:53 on the Talk of Chicago. I'm Cliff Kelley. We're streaming live at www.wvon.com. In the studio, we are pleased to have the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And he's been giving us a lot of information, of course, about international events, and particularly the assassination of Colonel Gaddafi. Brother Minister, go right ahead.
First, I would like to say some of the things that made me fall in love with Muammar Gaddafi. It wasn't any money that he loaned to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, or that he loaned to the Nation of Islam and forgave. For $5 million that he loaned us, for you to think that I am that kind of prostitute, that I would give myself to any man for money.
That's right.
It's the principle that made me his brother. Now look at what this man did. After nationalizing the oil, he used the oil revenue to benefit the Libyan people, building schools, infrastructure, universities, hospitals. He raised the literacy rate from 20% when he became the leader, and at the time of his assassination, it is 83%. Libya has one of the finest healthcare systems in the third world. All people have access to doctors, hospitals, clinics, and medicines free of charge. If a Libyan needs surgery that is unavailable in Libya, funding is provided for the surgery to be carried out overseas. He raised the life expectancy of the Libyan people from 44 years, and now at the time of his assassination, 75 years of age. Basic food items were subsidized and electricity was made available throughout the country. Brother Muammar Gaddafi has set up huge irrigation projects which were established in order to support a drive toward agricultural development and food self-sufficiency. He spent $33 billion on the man-made river, where his engineers brought water up out of the desert, and now pipelines ran from Benghazi and Tobruk almost to the door of Tunisia. Any Libyan who wanted to become a farmer was and still is given free use of land, a house, farm equipment, livestock, and seed. Brother Muammar Gaddafi vowed that his own parents, who lived in a tent in the desert, would not be housed until every Libyan was housed. He fulfilled that promise. Under the revolutionary leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya has now attained the highest standard of living in Africa. Money from Libya's oil revenue is directly deposited into the bank account of every Libyan. Women have full access to education, employment, and he has enabled women to serve in the armed forces. And this is most important. Gaddafi was the first and the only leader in the Arab world to formally apologize for the Arab role in the trade in captured Africans. Gaddafi acknowledged that the black Africans were the true owners of Libya and proclaimed in his Green Book, quote, "The black race shall prevail throughout the world." Now, Brother Gaddafi took oil money and started moving the Organization of African Unity toward the African Union with a goal toward uniting 53, now 54 nations in Africa to the United States of Africa. Whenever we called Africa, our call had to go through Europe, and over $500 million went to Europe. But Gaddafi put up 400 million, and the rest of Africa put up 100 million and put up an African satellite. Now you can call directly to Africa from anywhere in the world without going through Europe. He asked the African nations to stop sending their raw materials to Europe to be made into products and then sent back to Africa to be paid for in an exorbitant price range. He wanted the Africans to take their raw materials and make them into products and then sell their products on the world market. This is the man that was assassinated, and I'll close this point. The minute he wanted Africa united, America, Britain, France, Germany, Europe was against it. So they set up NEPAD, a new economic development pact. Gaddafi was against it. Sarkozy came up with another plan to take all the North African nations that are Arab and unite them with the nations of Southern Europe. Gaddafi rejected that. America wanted to set up on the African continent African as a launching pad for the recolonization of Africa. Gaddafi was against that. I read an article by the Jewish man from a Zionist that was the former assistant to Rumsfeld. I can't call his name.
Pearl.
Who?
Pearl.
No, not Pearl. Wolfowitz.
Wolfowitz, yeah.
Wolfowitz.
Hold your point, Minister. We got to go to a top of the hour break. That's the kind of information, though, that I wanted you to give us.
Carolina High School were injured today when a chemistry experiment sparked
That's
an
great.
explosion.
That's good.
Hazmat crews are still on the scene. A nurse who worked for Michael Jackson took the
There's so
stand
many
in the
people
trial
who
of
don't know
Dr.
that.
Conrad Murray today. Sherilyn Lee testified.
And they don't know it because the media is bought and paid for.
Surgical anesthetic.
This is a hell of a betrayal of the American people when you will not tell them the truth because you're afraid that if you tell the truth, your bosses will take your job from you. That's a hell of a thing. You don't have a democracy when you don't have a free press.
Go to CNN.com.
You're all slaves, and you love it. So you deserve what you get, the erosion of your democracy.
60-watt double light.
You'll soon be the laughing stock of the world.
That works out to less than 50 cents a
It's a
volt.
damn shame. That's why the children
So come in.
are occupying space in New York, in Boston, in Washington, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in other cities. Why? Because they're not looking to you as a source of information for them. Look how long it took you all to talk about what was going on in New York. It took you 2 weeks because the same people that control the banks control the media. You all know it. But you're afraid to say it. But God put it on Farrakhan to say it for you. And maybe one day you'll get some courage to stand up and give America free media, a real free fourth estate. But right now, you ain't even worth the time of day.
Local news headlines, traffic and weather up next on WVON.
I'm glad. Hell, I'm not hiding nothing. You need somebody to tell the truth.
That's right.
You need somebody that's not afraid to die for the truth, that you could be made free. Because you're not free. And you don't really know what it means to really be a free white person, a free black person, a free Mexican, a free Arab. If you're afraid to tell the truth, what future does your children have in a society where truth is brushed to the curb? I thank God for the young man that invented this wonderful technology.
Steve Jobs. Yeah.
Steve Jobs. That's the man that's freeing the whole planet. Where Zbigniew Brzezinski could say, yesterday it was easier to control 1 million people than to kill 1 million people. Then now he says it's easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people, because the genie is out of the box, the cat is out of the bag, the people all over the world are waking up. And you need to wake up and free America. Then you'll have a future, and your children will have a future. But if you're afraid for what? You're going to die anyway. Where can you run to escape death?
Can I have a price check on aisle? Ma'am?
If you love America, then fight for America to be free.
Yeah, I know. It's probably nothing.
Nothing? Shouldn't I don't know, like...
I'm not in the best mood, brother.
I know you're.
You're in a great mood.
Stop. No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Top of the hour is in a way to get a minister like 2 minutes. He don't work like that.
Yes, sir, brother.
I know, you're right. You're right. And I bet he was moving and I just couldn't.
I'm not only hurting for Gaddafi.
Yeah.
I'm hurting for us.
2 minutes at the top of the hour.
Okay.
That thing, who let the dogs out?
Good point. Thank you.
What has just been done has let the dogs of destruction out.
This message brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
I thank God that He didn't make me to fear your censure of me.
Republicans write you off with this kind of inactivity. That will happen. This is the time for you to tell.
Some run and hide from being a friend of Gaddafi now because
It is that you need.
he's a bad man.
9 to noon.
He killed his own people.
1690 WVON. Mornings.
I don't know any leader
Laura, you're on 1690 AM.
that has not killed somebody to come to power. That's why the leaders walk on red carpet, because they came to power shedding blood, and they shed blood to maintain power. But make a white carpet for Farrakhan. I killed nobody. But the God I serve, He's about to kill a lot of people.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. We're back. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. It's 5:08. I'm Cliff Kelley, and we're streaming live at www.wvon.com. And, of course, we are continuing with our in-studio guest, the illustrious Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam, who's been giving us some great information. We're going to take some calls very shortly. But before we do that, I want to go back, Brother Minister, and again, thank you for being here with us. I want to go back to what you were saying at the top of the hour about Paul Wolfowitz.
Paul Wolfowitz wrote an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that an African Union or a United States of Africa would not be good for the future of Israel. Now, I don't know why he said that, but if the United States of Africa would not be good for Israel, and the United States of Africa would not be good for Europe and America, then this is more reason why Gaddafi had to be taken out. And just before Gaddafi was assassinated, they said that our president was sending 100 U.S. troops into Uganda to help President Museveni in his war against the Lord's Resistance Army. Then I heard that Kenya is moving its troops to the border of Somalia to fight against Al-Shabaab, which is the Islamist group that is fighting for governance, for the power of governance in Somalia. Now, today I read that the man who is over the National Transitional Council said, and I'm quoting now, that they're going to institute Sharia. And my God, did you kill Gaddafi to have someone now institute the very thing that you've been fighting against all over the world? And this man, after he has come into some degree of power, tells you that he's going to establish Sharia and the banks will not charge interest on money following Sharia? What have you gotten yourself into, America? And did you think that if you pull all of your troops out of Iraq, that that's the end of it? No. These people are angry and hurt over the way American soldiers did them, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world. Oh, America, America. You're blinded by your arrogance. You're blinded by your military power, and it's leading you step by step to your destruction.
Brother Minister, you've mentioned a number of things, of course, that Colonel Gaddafi did. And that's what I wanted you to do, because we've talked about a lot of the positive things that he has done through his number of years that he was there. But also, I'd like you to mention the belief that he was going to start requiring oil to be sold on the gold standard, which he, of course, had a lot of gold. The same thing we heard about Saddam Hussein, that one of the reasons that he had to go was because he was talking about taking the dollar out of the element as the medium of exchange. Would you speak on that?
Brother Gaddafi had the largest amount of gold in the world, second only to China, even ahead of Russia. He had 144 6/10 tons of gold. They didn't mind him having it, but he was going to tie gold, the dinar, to gold, and was asking other Arab nations to tie their fiat money or paper money to real money, which is gold. This would destroy the economies of the West. So this man was a real thorn. in the side of America. That's why on the front page of the final call, I would not allow them to put a picture on our paper of Brother Gaddafi beaten and dead. I have him on the front page of the final call with his arms raised in triumph, because he will whoop you living or dead. And so will I. And so will my father Elijah Muhammad. We don't stop.
We have some
with
questions.
the grave.
We have some
yes,
questions
go ahead,
here
sir.
from
I'm
the
sorry.
press, and CBS had some questions. One of them you just answered. It was in the months leading up to his death. Gaddafi was very much portrayed as a villain. You knew him personally. Was that fair? Obviously, the answer to that is no, based on not only what he has tried to do for many, many people, but also, of course, what he's done for the people of Libya. When you talked about the literacy rate, which is probably just as high as the United States, higher than in some places, and the life expectation has been increased. But the thing that I was really interested in, I'd like you to give us a little more information on, was the African Union and what that would have meant to the world.
It was a very difficult process for him. He spent billions of dollars trying to get African leaders to remember something that I heard from the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson. He said, it's better to be the tail of something than the head of nothing. So he was trying to get African leaders out of the mindset of having a seat on the United Nations, having your flag represented and a national anthem, and economically you're still a slave. But if all 53 or 54 now of these countries united with a central bank, which they were working on, a federal government, and a language that all of them would accept as the official language of Africa. Oh my goodness. Railroads and highways tying all of these nations together, trading within themselves and beyond themselves. Africa would then be a power in the 21st century. And this is what Marcus Garvey saw. This is what Padmore saw. This is what Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah and Gamal Abdel Nasser saw. And this is what Brother Gaddafi was working on at the time of his assassination. He had already set up an African Development Bank. How much money was in that bank, Brother Akbar?
I'm not sure.
I heard it was about $70 billion, so that Africa would not have to go to the World Bank, would not have to go to the International Monetary Fund. Excuse me. They could go to their own African Development Bank and borrow money without this exorbitant interest and build Africa. This is what Brother Gaddafi was doing, and I hasten to tell you, my dear Mrs. Clinton, ooh, you are in for a shock. If the vultures of Europe think they're going to pick that body. Now, of course, you're trying to get back in there to make sure that whoever comes to power will be in your favor. Well, like you thought when Mubarak went down. But look at what's happening in Egypt now. This is going to happen all over the world. I want you to know that you're through as a world power. Through.
You mentioned Sharia. The members of the NTC. We don't even know who these revolutionaries are.
Yes, that's true. They found out that some of the fighters from the eastern part of Libya that were fighting America in Afghanistan and are members of Libya and members of Al-Qaeda. And when I first heard Gaddafi say that these are people from Al-Qaeda, I said, oh, he's making that up. But it's true. And now America's confused. Should we give these weapons that Gaddafi had in the hands of a new government that is Al-Qaeda or lovers of Sharia? Boy, did you make a boo-boo this time.
Yeah, and there are thousands of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles that haven't been found yet. So there's a lot of problems here. We'll be back. We'll take some more questions with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan right after this. Minister Louis Farrakhan is in the studio. I'm Cliff Kelley, so pleased to have him. And he is responding to questions. This was another CBS question. How do you explain the visible hatred on display in Libya for Gaddafi, and what were Gaddafi's feelings about the United States?
How do you explain the visible hatred of the people for Jesus at the time of his crucifixion? Jesus was the greatest revolutionary that ever lived. But the scripture says he was hated without a cause. But if you saw the movie by Mel Gibson, I think it was a little over the top, but Jesus was scourged, wasn't he? He was beaten, wasn't he? He was crucified, wasn't he? And were the people joyous when he was killed? Yes, they were, because they did not know who he was. Did his early followers suffer? Yes, they did. Were the early Christians put in the Colosseum in Rome to be eaten by lions? Yes, they were. Name me one prophet of God, one great revolutionary who was against the current temporal powers that was not hated by his own people. Let me close on this point. I was in Ghana with President Jerry John Rawlings, and he was telling me how he went to a school and he was teaching the students, and at the end of the class he shook all their hands and one student refused to shake his hand. And he went to the student and asked him, "Son, why didn't you shake my hand?" And the young student said, "Because you killed my father." Now, when you are a revolutionary and there are people in power that take the resources of your country that belong to the people and give Western powers easy access to those resources, inside the country there will always be another force rising. So every dictator that America supported had a repressive regime against the legitimate aspirations of that people. Gaddafi rose against the West. When you rise against the West, then you have the CIA, MI6, Mossad, you have the best intelligence in the world working to undermine your country. In the last 10 years of Gaddafi's life, all inside his countries, these rats were working.
You know, the other part, what was Gaddafi's feelings about the U.S.? He's got pictures with the president. In fact, one of those is in the final call. What were his feelings? He was in the UN?
Well, Brother Gaddafi was happy to come in out of the cold. His son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, was reared in London at the London School of Economics. He was being heralded in the West as different from his father. And it was Saif al-Islam that told his father, we've got to go a different way. So he introduced his father to a more open kind of thing. Can you imagine Richard Pearl going to Libya to help clean up Gaddafi's image? This is the same thing that some members of the Jewish community, when we met, said to me, Farrakhan, if you change your ways, in other words, that would be pleasing to us, we will clean up your image. So they know that through this media, they dirtied the image of an honorable man. Huh? Well, to hell with them cleaning up my image. God will help me to clean it up by doing good works as yours is being sullied. So he loved the American people, and of course Bush brought him in out of the cold. He gave up all of his weapons of mass destruction. He softened his approach, and during that time the rats found the cheese and they were eating. Let me tell you, every dictator that America had killed people to support that dictatorship. And every revolutionary that overthrew the rule of a dictator fostered by Western colonial imperialist powers was always had to have internal dynamics to listen to what the people were saying, to report those that were against the regime. So naturally in Libya, Libyans were killed, and those people certainly did not like Muammar Gaddafi.
The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We will continue right after this.
News, traffic, and weather.
Good afternoon. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I'm Cliff Kelley. We're streaming live at www.wvon.com. It is 5:36, 591-1690. Two announcements before we go back to our wonderful guest in studio, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The panelists for tonight, John Lewis, coach the Ministry on Religion and Race, Salim Wakil, of course, our good friend who is a host here at WVON, and the senior editor of In These Times, Zaki Baroudi, President and General Universal African Peoples Organization, Dr. Conrad Worrell, Director and Professor of the Jacob H. Crothers Center for Inner City Studies at Northeastern Illinois University, Ali Baghdadi, writer, activist, and friend of an associate of the Nation of Islam for over 45 years. I saw him earlier. He's just a great guy. And Buzz Palmer, director of the People's Program. And let me say this, too, because we have callers, and we're not going to get to all of them. And the minister, during the break, had already asked me, and this is a joke, he's asking me, can I come back on and talk about what African Americans ought to be doing? I wanted to say, do a bear crap in the woods? The answer is yes. So, for those of you who are listening, and we don't get your question today because we've got a number of them, and that was one question I told him, well, somebody asked that, and I looked at my notes, that was my question, that we should be, he had said he wanted to address that, and of course, based on what we've been talking about with Colonel Gaddafi's assassination and the other things in international politics, those of you who get the final call know he has addressed just that issue recently, and he's going to come back next week, and we're going to go into depth on that. But in the meantime, I have a question here from the Media Connection. Laima, yes, thank you. What would you advise President Obama to do to prevent protest over the economic conditions in America from becoming violent? And we're talking about, I was going to mention that too, the Occupy, Wall Street, so forth and so on.
Well, I think President Obama and the Homeland Security probably will instruct the police to be very, very careful. These are children or young people who are fed up with bailing out banks while I think 16 million homes in America have been foreclosed on. People are hurting. And these young people are expressing themselves. At first in New York, the police were very hard on them, and this is not the best approach. But if it gets to the point where America gets tired of the protest of these young people and something happens like what happened at Kent State and young Americans are killed, I tell you that militias in this country that have been training for war against their own government will come out in the streets to protect these children, and it's on. And I would like you to tell me what you are going to do. Since you said Gaddafi was wrong, this one is wrong, now eat the soup that you've prepared. Because I told you before that what you saw overseas was coming to your door, and now it is here, and it will get worse. I pray that you will tell your police to be full of restraint, but when they are not, then be careful. There was a woman named Mrs. Wolf, a middle-aged woman who went to an affair in New York, dressed in an evening gown. And they were protesting, and this woman went over and talked to them. The police had lied and said that they couldn't use a bullhorn, so they repeated comments. After one said it, the whole crowd said it. This woman was arrested, her and her escort, for nothing more than learning the truth of the permit that they had and walking in a way where she didn't obstruct the pedestrians, and the police arrested her. So America, you know, you're going to have to be careful, because your police are upset, they're hurting, and they might do something very crazy, and it's on.
You said that, Brother Minister, on Savior's Day. Let's take a caller, if he's there. Hopefully he's been holding. Rudolph is from Brooklyn. Rudolph, are you here? Rudolph? Hello? Okay, maybe he hung up.
Yes, sir.
Oh, there he is. There he is. Hey, Rudolph, thanks for holding.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Minister.
Wa alaikum salam.
Brother Kelley.
Thank you.
Brother Minister, with everything that's going on, and it's a shame what has happened to Brother Gaddafi, but everything that's going on, it's distracting people's view from right here at home and the things that are going on here at home. We are going into winter now, into another winter that is estimated to be going to be worse than last year's winter. And our cities, our inner cities, our people are not prepared for the weather that they're going to face and the collateral damage from that weather. Cities are going bankrupt. They're laying off the emergency workers. And again, the hardest hit communities are the black community, color, and communities with no economic means. How do we galvanize these people our people to let them know of the gravity of the situation that they're in, and that we must organize where we are for the fight that's going to be right here, the fight of just trying to live and get through this winter.
Okay, thank you, Brother Rudolph.
Thank you for your question, brother. That's why I asked Brother Cliff Kelley, if I could come back to talk about the way forward for us. Now, I don't know about you, but if your mother passed away and you were in the middle of something, the passing of your mother would mean so much to you that you would stop for a moment to address your mother's passing. My brother was assassinated, so I'm taking this time to speak on my brother and what his life meant to me and to millions of others. But that does not mean that our attention is off of the way forward for black people or for the American people. So God willing, I'll be back on this radio station next week to talk about the way forward. But let me tell you something, brother. You know, as a people, we are earning a chastisement from God, because wise men have been in front of us warning us of days just like you mentioned. But what have we done about it? We sat around and we paid no attention to the warning that was given to us over 50 years ago by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who laid out a plan for our survival. He called for a united front of black leaders to sit down and plan the way out of poverty and want for our people. And what did we say to Elijah Muhammad? To hell with you, Elijah. These jealous-hearted Negro leaders did not want to listen to a black man who had a way out. And others have come and said the same thing, and we still sit around doing nothing. Do you know how stupid we look after 50 years marching on Washington, begging white people to give us jobs when $1.1 trillion came through our hands last year? We are earning the pain that we are receiving. So I'll be back next week. But let me tell you something. If you don't follow good advice, then you deserve your butt kicked.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think Brother Rudolph got the message.
The whole country got the message.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Brother Minister. That's fine. Just before we take another break, I wanted to. There was a question relative to what is your opinion as to how this incident is going to affect our relationship with other nations.
Well, you know, I look at my brother Barack Obama, one of the most beautiful men in his spirit that I had a chance to meet in this life, and to watch him campaigning for the highest office of this land made us all so very happy and proud of our brother. But naturally, when you campaign for an office, it's not like sitting in the seat. And that's why I heard one of the Republicans say, the moment that I am president, I will sign an executive order and outlaw Obamacare. Like President Barack Obama said, the moment I'm elected, I'll sign an executive order closing down Guantanamo. 2 years, 8 months later, Guantanamo still exists. It's easy to say things when you're not sitting in the seat. But when you sit in the seat and face the realities that that seat represents, it can change you if you're not strong enough to change it. And what has happened to our brother, he surrounded himself with the folks from Goldman Sachs. And the folks from Goldman Sachs had him take out $800 billion bailout that bailed out Wall Street. So the people are angry. He fought hard as you can fight for health care. He got it passed, but they're going to repeal it. Now, on the foreign policy front. My brother, who went to Cairo, Egypt, who went to Turkey with a beautiful approach to the Muslim world because he seemed to understand Islam. But the moment he did that, a man like Romney, we don't need nobody to apologize for us. Well, hell, if you're wrong and your policies have injured the nation, somebody has to apologize. If the Pope of Rome was strong enough, and I'm talking about John Paul, when John Paul apologized to the indigenous peoples of the world that the church was wrong, how can he apologize, and he's the head of all Christendom, and you, this little nondescript former governor of Massachusetts, gonna beat the hell out of a president that wants to heal your wounds and bring people together, but you jumped on him. You beat him down. You made him into the man that he's becoming. You should suffer the consequences of it. And for a man to have won the Nobel Peace Prize after just a few days in office and now has brought America into 5 different wars. Who led him this way? Who are his advisors? I say to you, Brother Barack, you had a great future. You're only a baby, 50 years old. Look at what Jimmy Carter did after his time in the White House. Look at what Clinton is trying to do. But these wicked demons that advise you are trying to destroy your future so that you will never be able to go to Africa and win Africa, nor the Muslim world, nor Central and South America. They've literally finished you off in one term. I hope if you get a second one, you'll recover.
It is 5:55, and we have certainly enjoyed having the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in our studio. He's going to come back next week and talk about some things we need to hear relative to what's going on in this country. I want to thank all the press for coming out. Thank you, folks. And, Brother Minister, why don't you please give us a closing statement, sir?
First, thank you, Cliff, for allowing us the privilege to use these airwaves to spread as much truth as we know about our fallen brother. I thank the members of the press who are here, and I say to them with deep humility that a free press is what America needs to save itself from the fall of the greatest nation in the history of the last 6,000 years. The young children that are your babies and mine, your grandchildren and mine, that are occupying New York and Washington and cities in America and cities throughout the world, they must be heard. They may not know exactly what they're marching for or sitting for or occupying for, but they want fairness. They want justice. They want the country that they fight for, that they bleed for, that they're willing to die for, to be more responsive to the needs of the American people. The greedy bankers are not. And now, for the first time in our history, people are marching on banks and marching on bank executives. Soon they'll be marching on media and marching on media executives because it took you too long to stand up for the young people that are trying to stand up for a better America. The Tea Party, I respect them. Our people think they're racist. I really don't care. But what I do care about is the young Tea Party people are not under the control of AIPAC or the corporate powers of America. So they will stimulate those in Congress and make them do better by the American people. So I welcome these kinds of developments. But now, can President Obama bring jobs to the American people? I've listened to his jobs bill, and next week we'll give you another plan that was given to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that if we go to work on it, we can create jobs. But to beg the government for jobs, for more security for us, when these are things that we can do for ourselves, is a waste of our valuable time. So I look forward to being with you again next week to talk about jobs, to talk about justice, to talk about the way forward for black people, but not only for us, the way forward for the American people. I close with this statement. If 50% of our young people are dropping out of high school, if 50 million Americans are considered functional illiterates, meaning that they can read but only at a 5th grade level, how can America produce jobs for that many people who are unqualified to hold a job with the technology that is being advanced? Who will bring back a manufacturing base to America to put the little man to work again? These are the things we want to talk about when we come back. But talk is cheap. We're all going to have to organize and pool our resources intellectually and financially and do something to help ourselves. Thank you, Cliff, for the privilege of being on your show. And if the strength and power and anger in my voice, in my soul, ill-affected you or hurt your feelings, it's only a mirror of the hurt that I feel for a brother that I believe was one of the great, great revolutionaries of our time.
Thank you so much for being here, Brother Minister, and we'll see you next week.